They told you to be present, to show up, to stay available, to respond fast, keep the conversation going, give more energy, more warmth, more effort. And you believed them. You followed that script your entire life. And what did it get you? Ignored, forgotten, replaced the moment something newer walked through the door. Here is the truth that no self-help book will ever print. The more you give, the less you are worth. Not because people are cruel, because the human brain, your brain, is wired to devalue what it can have without effort. Scarcity is not a manipulation tactic. It is biology. It is mathematics. It is the oldest principle of power in human history. You were not taught to create mental presence. You were taught to beg for physical attention. And there is a difference between those two things so vast, so profound, that once you understand it, you will never compete for anyone's attention again. There are 7 specific principles that govern how obsession is built inside the human mind. The 7th one will make you understand why everything you have ever been taught about connection has been quietly sabotaging you. If you are not ready for this, close the video. Go back to the crowd. But if you want to understand how influence actually works, stay. You were brainwashed to believe that love, connection, and influence are built through availability. Show up enough, care enough, invest enough, and people will stay. Churches preached it. Schools modeled it. The entire architecture of social conditioning was built on one silent lie: that proximity equals value. Niccolò Machiavelli understood something that modern society spent 5 centuries trying to bury. In The Prince, he wrote that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Most people read that and flinch. They call it cold, heartless. But Machiavelli was not describing cruelty. He was describing the mechanics of the human mind. Fear, real strategic fear, is simply the emotional state of someone who has not yet figured you out. Someone who cannot place you. Someone whose mind keeps returning to you because you have not given them closure. Robert Greene built an entire architecture on this principle in the 48 Laws of Power. Law 16. Use absence to increase respect and honor. The moment you make yourself too available, you lose the scarcity that gives you value. This is not philosophy. It is psychology. It is measurable, testable, and ruthlessly applicable. I'm going to show you how to rewire the way other minds perceive you, how to move from someone people like to someone people cannot stop thinking about. But be warned, what follows is not comfortable. It does not fit inside the motivational framework you were sold. Phase 1. Occupy the mind, not the room. Most people believe influence is a function of time spent. The longer they are around, the more they matter. They extend conversations past their natural end. They flood inboxes. They fill silences with noise. They have been trained to believe that visibility equals value. The average man thinks that to be remembered, he must be present constantly. He works harder at maintaining contact than at creating impact. And the result is that he becomes wallpaper, seen everywhere, noticed nowhere. This is where the Zeigarnik effect becomes your most dangerous weapon. Bluma Zeigarnik, a Soviet psychologist in the 1920s, discovered that the human brain retains incomplete tasks far more powerfully than completed ones. Waiters remember unpaid bills. We remember unfinished conversations. We obsess over open loops. The mind does not rest until it finds closure. And if you withhold closure strategically, you become permanently lodged in someone's cognitive space. Cosimo de Medici, patriarch of the Florentine banking dynasty and the most powerful man of the 15th century, was famously described as a man who spoke little and revealed less. He ended meetings before others expected them to end. His silence was legendary, and through that silence, he created a city that spent every waking hour speculating about what he was thinking. He did not chase influence, he manufactured gravity. Your practical instruction: end every interaction before the energy peaks, not when it fades, when it is still rising. Mid-conversation, mid-laughter, mid-revelation. A controlled exit at the height of engagement leaves an unfinished emotional state, and the brain, unable to complete the loop, replays the interaction. You stop being a person they spoke to. You become a thought they cannot turn off. Because if phase 1 is about when you leave, phase 2 is about what they cannot read while you are still there. Phase 2. Never give them a label. The human mind is a categorization machine. From the moment it encounters a person, it begins building a mental file. Friendly, cold, confident, anxious, reliable, dangerous. The moment the file is complete, attention drops. The brain allocates processing power elsewhere. You become solved. 99% of people hand the brain everything it needs to file them away within the first 3 interactions. They reveal their humor too quickly, their insecurities in the second conversation, their entire emotional architecture by the third. They call this authenticity. It is actually psychological suicide. Ambiguity is not deception. Ambiguity is cognitive leverage. When you cannot be placed into a single category, the brain stays active. It keeps watching. It keeps analyzing. It does not allocate you to the archive. It leaves your file open. And an open file is perpetual attention. In social psychology, this is called the need for cognitive closure, a concept studied extensively by Arie Kruglanski at the University of Maryland. Individuals with high closure needs feel intense discomfort when they cannot fully explain someone's behavior. They invest disproportionate mental energy in trying to resolve that ambiguity. You want to be that ambiguity. Napoleon Bonaparte was a master of this. To his generals, he was fearless. To diplomats, he was unknowable. To his enemies, he was calculating. To his allies, he was volatile. No single person in Napoleon's orbit could construct a complete picture of who he was. This was not accident. This was architecture. And it made him the most mentally occupied figure in the minds of every court in Europe. Your practical instruction: stop presenting your full self in any single interaction. Show one facet, calm in one moment, sharp in the next. Reserved when emotional engagement is expected, lightly amused when seriousness is assumed. Choose what to reveal. Choose what to withhold. Never give a complete picture, because the mind does not obsess over what it has already solved. And once they cannot categorize you, they cannot stop watching for clues, which is when the next phase becomes devastating. Phase 3. Build the loop and never close it. Certainty is the death of psychological investment. The moment someone knows exactly where they stand with you, exactly how you feel, exactly how you will respond, exactly where your attention rests, the emotional equation closes. There is nothing left to solve. The mind relaxes, and a relaxed mind does not obsess. Most people treat transparency as virtue. They communicate their feelings immediately. They define the relationship. They offer certainty because they believe certainty builds trust. What it actually builds is comfort. And comfort is the quietest way to become forgettable. Controlled uncertainty is a different animal entirely. It is not confusion, not manipulation through inconsistency. It is emotional steadiness paired with selective access. Your character is stable. Your integrity is visible. But your internal emotional position is never fully declared. You are warm sometimes, reserved at others. You engage deeply on certain days and step back without explanation on others. The brain detects this pattern and begins to seek resolution. It replays your words for hidden meaning. It monitors your tone. It measures your distance. This cognitive activity is what attachment researchers call anxious preoccupation, a state in which a person involuntarily focuses mental resources on another. You did not force this. You created the conditions for it. Julius Caesar exploited this with surgical precision. Every senator, every general, every ally in Rome spent their political careers trying to decode Caesar's next move. His warmth was never unconditional. His praise was selective. His anger appeared without obvious trigger. The men closest to him described him as brilliant and unknowable in the same breath. That dual quality made him psychologically inescapable. Your practical instruction: speak with precision, not volume. Say enough to create connection, not enough to remove interpretation. Let your engagement be real, but let your availability be structured by your own rhythm, not their emotional pressure. When your attention arrives, let it mean something. Because the mind values what it cannot predict. You are still here. Good. The fragile ones already left. Comment below. I occupy the mind. Phase 4. Associate yourself with elevation. The human brain is goal-directed at every level. It constantly evaluates whether any given person, environment, or relationship is moving it forward or backward. This evaluation runs beneath conscious thought. And the result, whether someone feels better or worse for having been in your presence, determines how much psychological priority they assign to you. Most people try to create attachment through comfort, agreement, validation, emotional ease. And while comfort builds warmth, it rarely builds obsession. Comfort relaxes the mind. Elevation activates it. When someone consistently leaves an interaction with you feeling sharper, more focused, more capable, their brain begins to chemically associate your presence with progress, and the reward circuits attached to growth are among the most powerful motivating systems in human biology. This is not an opinion. Neuroscientist Jaak Panksepp identified what he called the SEEKING System, a fundamental neural architecture that drives goal pursuit, curiosity, and anticipatory desire. The people who activate your SEEKING system become psychologically magnetic. They are associated with forward momentum. And the brain pursues forward momentum the way water runs downhill, without effort, by design. Galileo Galilei sat in a room with popes and cardinals and made them feel simultaneously inferior and electrified. The men who stood against him were thinking about him long after the trial. The men who stood with him would have followed him into exile. Neither reaction was about affection. Both were about the experience of standing in proximity to a mind that moved the horizon. He did not elevate through advice. He elevated through the sheer weight of his thinking. Your practical instruction. Enter every interaction with a single goal. Leave them with one thought they did not have before you arrived. Not a performance, not information. A perspective that shifts the angle. A question that opens a door. One moment that makes the conversation feel like it mattered. When you are consistently the person who raises the quality of a room's thinking, your presence becomes associated with progress, and people return to what moves them forward. But elevation without contrast is still a steady state, and steady states do not create peaks. Phase 5. Master the architecture of emotional contrast. The brain does not store continuous experience. It stores peaks and transitions. What you remember from last year is not the steady middle of your days. It is the moments that broke the pattern. The shock, the laugh that came from nowhere, the moment of silence that landed differently than expected. Emotional monotony is invisible. The person who is always serious, always light, always intense, always agreeable, disappears into the predictable. The brain adapts and tunes them out. But contrast resets attention. Contrast is what the brain encodes as memory. Daniel Kahneman's Peak-End Rule, established through decades of behavioral research, demonstrates that we judge an experience almost entirely by its emotional peak and its ending, not by the aggregate. This means that one sharp, unexpected moment of depth or humor can override hours of ordinary interaction. Your job is not to be consistent. Your job is to be strategically inconsistent with precision. The Spartans understood this, an army known for its silence, discipline, and emotional restraint. But when a Spartan general spoke, rarely, briefly, without ornament, every word carried the weight of all the silence that came before it. The contrast between their stillness and their moments of intensity created an effect that paralyzed enemies before a single blade was drawn. Your practical instruction. Identify your dominant emotional register and build deliberate contrast into it. If you are calm and measured, allow one moment of unexpected edge. If you are warm, be briefly and genuinely distant. Do not perform these contrasts. Time them. Earn them. Let the calm make the intensity more powerful. Let the humor make the seriousness hit harder, because every emotional valley you create makes the next peak more unforgettable. Phase 6. Exit before you peak. Most people stay too long. They hold the interaction past its natural high. They keep talking when the energy has already plateaued. They do this because they enjoy the attention and they fear the space that follows. And in doing so, they erase everything they built. Every interaction has an emotional arc. Interest climbs. Engagement deepens. A peak is reached. And then, if the interaction continues, the energy dissipates. The conversation becomes repetitive. The novelty vanishes. And the brain, which will remember how the interaction ended, encodes it as ordinary. Strategic individuals exit at the peak, not after, not when the energy runs out, when it is still alive, when there is still more that could be said, but you choose not to say it. This requires emotional self-control that the average person cannot sustain, because the average person is trying to hold the moment rather than preserve it. The Zeigarnik Effect again. An incomplete experience retains more psychological weight than a complete one. When you leave at the peak, the interaction does not close. It continues in their mind. They replay the last exchange. They imagine the continuation, and, in imagining it, they invest in you, without being asked, without being pressured, because their brain is doing the work for you. Your practical instruction. Before any interaction ends, ask yourself, is the energy still rising, or has it peaked? If it is still rising, end it, calmly, without explanation, without apology. A short sentence, a moment of eye contact, and an exit that signals you have somewhere else to be, not because you are manufacturing importance, but because you actually do. Build a life full enough that you always have somewhere to be. Phase 7. Never signal need. Nothing collapses psychological influence faster than visible need. The moment someone detects that their attention, approval, or presence is necessary for your emotional stability, the entire architecture of your presence shifts. You move from someone they are drawn toward to someone they feel responsible for. Responsibility is not desire. Responsibility is a burden. The majority of people are signaling need every day without awareness. They respond too fast. They over-explain their absence. They fish for reactions. Their emotional state rises and falls visibly based on how others respond. They do not realize that every time they do this, they are communicating the same thing. I need you to regulate me. And that communication kills desire. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth, identifies secure attachment as the psychological state from which the healthiest and most magnetic individuals operate. The securely attached individual does not require constant reassurance. Their emotional baseline is self-contained. They engage from fullness, not from fear. And this creates a paradox. The person who least needs your attention becomes the person you cannot stop giving it to. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most powerful empire in the known world from a position of psychological self-sufficiency so complete that those around him described him as the only ruler in Roman history who genuinely did not seem to want to be ruler. That indifference, real, not performed, made him the most respected man in Rome for 2 decades. People do not pursue what is desperate. They pursue what appears to have no use for being pursued. Your practical instruction? Build the internal life first. Goals, discipline, forward direction. A mind occupied by its own momentum does not leak need. When you are genuinely pursuing something larger than any single relationship, your attention becomes naturally selective. And selective attention is perceived as valuable. You are not withholding. You are operating from fullness. There is a difference. The difference is felt by everyone in the room. This is the cold path, the lonely one. The path where you stop fighting for attention and start understanding how minds actually work. Machiavelli wrote The Prince in exile. Stripped of his position in Florence, subjected to torture on the Strapato, cast out from the world he had spent his career navigating. He sat in disgrace and produced the most influential text on power in the history of Western civilization. Not because the world gave him what he needed, because he understood that influence is not granted, it is architected, even in the dark, especially in the dark. The wolf does not explain itself to the sheep. It does not campaign for their respect. It exists in accordance with its own nature, and its nature commands attention without requesting it. The man in exile builds his empire in his own mind before he ever rebuilds it in the world. That is the only empire that cannot be taken from him. This path is cold. There will be moments when operating this way feels like standing outside in winter while others are warm inside. You will wonder if the restraint is worth it, if the silence costs too much, if the independence is loneliness dressed in philosophy. But understand this: the alternative is a life spent chasing, adjusting yourself to maintain comfort you were never supposed to need, shrinking your presence to keep others from feeling threatened by it, trading your psychological sovereignty for the temporary warmth of someone else's approval. This freedom is cold, but it is the only freedom that is truly yours. You made it to the end. That already places you outside the majority. Most people want power without the cold. They want influence without the discipline. They want to occupy minds while still being mentally owned by every reaction they receive. You are not them. Subscribe not because I asked you to. Subscribe because you are done being psychologically invisible. Because you are ready to stop chasing attention and start commanding presence. And what I cover publicly is only the beginning. The deeper principles, the ones the algorithm suppresses, the ones that require you to be ready before you hear them, those exist somewhere beyond this video. You will find them when you are prepared for what they require. Your mind is the weapon. Now you know how to make others think about you long after you leave.